You have to edit this bit out because I've completely lost what I was going to say. I haven't just derailed my train of thought. I think my train has disappeared. Hold on. Do I sound different, Danny?
You, not to me, you don't. No.
Well, hopefully the final result that our listeners will be enjoying, they will notice a distinct difference. So I guess this is probably a good time for us to talk a little bit about our workflow, because from today onwards, it's going to be somewhat... Well, actually, the workflow is not going to be different, but the result is going to be quite different, hopefully. So we've received a number of comments from friends of the show that Danny's audio quality is always stellar, whereas Alex's audio quality is always a bit questionable.
Right.
So I think it's time that we came clean and confessed to everybody actually how this was done and how we're going to be doing it from here on.
Okay. I think you might have mentioned in a previous episode, I can't remember. I think in one of the first or second episodes or something, you said something about shouting into your MacBook, but I can't remember if that was in the actual episode or if it was something that we sort of said in the after show and didn't make it in.
Right. I don't make it a habit to shout into my computers, but up until now, basically, you've been recording with what? What is it that you're recording with?
It's the Blue Yeti, which is, I think, the most popular microphone in podcast recording, from what I can gather.
Right. And basically, I have been literally talking into the side of my computer and then spending a good, 5 minutes each show putting my recording through some pretty complicated denoise algorithms and de-reverberation algorithms in order to make it sound even passable.
Right. I mean, I think all things considered, it's not been too bad. Like, listening back to some of the previous episodes, the first couple of episodes, while you were still working out all the plugins you were going to have to do to get it workable, you can hear the difference in quality sort of ramp up. But
right.
I think you've done, a pretty good job considering you are literally using the inbuilt microphone on a computer.
I think the best of times with the previous episodes, it kind of sounded like we were both sitting in the same room, you talking directly into the microphone and me kind of sitting next to you off axis.
Right.
At the best of times.
Yeah.
So now, some new developments in my studio over here. You may notice that not only has my voice quality improved, but also the amount of reverberation has hopefully decreased because I have all of my acoustic panels up now.
Very good.
And I will tell you a little bit about those later on in the show because that's definitely something I want to tell everybody about. But back on topic, the microphone. So a very, very good friend of mine in the United States actually was no longer using this particular microphone, and he very kindly sent it to me to use on the show. And it is a Heil PR30. Heil is an American microphone manufacturer who make some very high-end, I wouldn't say boutique-y, but just very pro-level. No, that's not the right word, is it? I guess expensive, maybe.
Very expensive microphones.
I think that's probably the amateurs can use expensive microphones too, can't they?
I think so. I think that's fair.
I definitely count as a microphone amateur, as I shall prove shortly. Anyway, he was no longer using his PR30, so he sent it to me.
That's very kind of him.
Yes, the Heil PR30, if you Google it, you will find that it is the most popular microphone for miking guitar amps.
Oh.
So there you go.
Okay.
That's why I sound like a rock god now. Don't I? No?
Well, so I can't tell. So you're not using this microphone, like you've got a bit of a complicated setup where you're recording with one thing and FaceTiming to me with another, right? Because you sound the same as normal to me.
Yeah, that's right.
So if you haven't got that set up, then I think you should contact your friend about the quality of this microphone.
Yeah, so basically the way it usually works is I have my Mac on the side, which is doing a FaceTime audio call with Danny, and I used to record on the Mac at the same time, but now I'm recording into my work PC, and quite nervous about that. You were kind of laughing at me last week when I said, okay, next show will be the first one that I'm recording on the PC.
Right.
And I was kind of worried about the PC crashing halfway through the recording because these become, we're talking a good, 500 megabyte recording for an hour and a half or so that we talk?
Right, yeah. Well, recently it's often been 2 hours before we start cutting it down. But
right.
I'm sure, it's a new computer, right? It hasn't had time to get all old and crusty like Windows PCs do.
Right.
So I think it'll be okay. I have faith in the ability of your few weeks old computer to record a 2-hour conversation.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it doesn't crash halfway through, or we're going to have some very messy editing. So
Yes.
back to the workflow. Basically, I call you on my Mac and we talk as just a regular audio call.
Yep.
And we record our parts individually. The final files that I end up giving you is an edited version of your recording of the conversation and an edited version of my recording of the conversation.
Right.
And then you splice and dice and get it all, make sure that the ums and the ahs are cleanly edited out.
Well, as far as I can. Yep.
And then basically you send back to me the stems of that, after which I put it through a increasingly simple signal chain of plugins, which is nice. And then we have the final mastered result.
Very exciting.
So I have to tell you a little story about this microphone, and this will qualify what I said before about amateurs being able to use expensive microphones, because
Oh, I see. Okay.
yes, as you know, I make audio for video games. I do sound effects and music production. However, I actually am more of a synthesizer guy than I am a recording guy.
Right.
And I know very, very little about microphones.
I see.
And when this microphone arrived, I was excited to try it out, but it's actually the very first microphone I've ever owned.
First, like, proper microphone you've ever owned.
No, first, well, I guess if you discount the microphone on the iPhone earphones that you get,
Right.
and you discount the microphone that's built into the Mac, then no, it's actually the very first microphone.
Oh, the first one. You've never had an SM57 or anything like that?
Nope,
Wow.
nope, never.
Oh.
Yeah, so I was excited to try it out. Plugged it in. Now, bear in mind, this microphone has come in a box, in a package from California.
Right.
And I found that it was like my voice was going through a high-pass filter at about 2,000 hertz and above.
You mentioned that you were worried that something had gone wrong with it in transit or something.
Yeah, and I was really concerned. I had no idea what to do. I mean, I don't know anything about how microphones work. I mean, I understand the basic, the rudiments of the electronics, but there's no way I could, fix it or anything. And I tried a different interface, and I tried on the Mac, and I tried on the PC, and I tried a different cable, and it was just not working. So towards the end of it all, I just thought, well, what do I have to lose? So I just do what any amateur would do with a broken microphone, and just gave it a good solid whack onto my hand, really, and it worked. That's how I fixed my microphone.
And it worked.
It actually worked. Yes, it actually worked. So
okay, good.
that's how an amateur uses an expensive microphone. If it doesn't work, you just bang it on your head,
Just
or
whack it.
yeah,
Yeah.
give it a good
Oh, well, that fills me with confidence.
right. So it's working. I then came across another challenge, and that was that microphone stands, for those who don't know, and I certainly did not know, actually have two varieties of mounting thread. By thread, I mean the mounting screw on the top.
Right.
The American size is quite large. I guess it's about, 1.5 centimeters,
Right.
which would be, I don't know, like 7 tons and 4 feet and 9 Fahrenheits in the imperial system.
2.5 centimeters in an inch. So 1.5 centimeters is
It's like
just over half an
it's
inch.
the size of the king's kidney bean on a Wednesday or something.
Right. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Let's move on, shall we? Yeah, the American threads are larger, and the European threads, where I bought my microphone stand from Germany, from an online store in Germany.
Right.
And it comes with a European thread, which is very narrow, which is kind of like about, what would it be, about 8 millimeters. So I had to take a special visit to the music store downtown, where they kind of laughed at me and said, well, of course, if you've got an American microphone, you need an adapter to use it on a European stand, you idiot.
Of course.
Well, they didn't say it exactly like that, but that's kind of how I felt. You learn every day. Life is a learning experience.
Right, exactly. So you've sent me a picture here, and I can see very, very attractive red and black color scheme, which is obviously the most important thing in a microphone.
That's right, the color scheme.
And and you've got it attached. You haven't got this on a shock mount, have you?
No, so this microphone is extremely well designed. It has inside the capsule, I don't know, I don't really get it, but there's something about it that you don't actually need to have it on a shock mount.
All right. Okay.
You might also notice that it doesn't have any kind of windshield, like a popper stopper.
Oh, yeah.
All of that is actually built in.
Oh, very nice. Well, that makes things easier.
Yeah, that's right. And it looks fantastic. I mean, it's all black, and the top end of the microphone grill is this nice red color. And that's actually done intentionally to make sure there is no misunderstanding that this is a forward-firing microphone.
Oh, I see. Is it so? I'm showing my ignorance about microphones, but is this a dynamic rather than a condenser microphone then?
It is indeed a dynamic microphone, but it has characteristics of a condenser microphone.
Oh, okay.
Meaning that it can take being a dynamic microphone, this is again my very limited understanding, so all of the other podcasters and audio producers out there are cringing right now, but I'm going to sally forth regardless.
Very good.
Dynamic microphones take a very, very wide, very large dynamic range, meaning you can put very, very quiet sounds and extremely loud sounds with very sharp transients into them, and they will handle them with ease.
Right.
On the other hand, condenser microphones are far more accurate, I guess. I don't know. But much more delicate at the same time, and often require external power via 48-volt phantom power, which is a feature of most audio interfaces and mic preamps.
Right.
This one doesn't require any power, so I think I should probably stop talking about microphones now because this is very embarrassing.
Okay, good. Yeah, the other difference that I've heard bandied around in the past is that dynamic microphones have a tendency to be more directional, so you need better mic technique if you're using a dynamic microphone. Condenser microphones are better at picking out not surrounding noise. Well, they do. The problem is they pick up surrounding noise, but they can also still pick up your voice or whatever they're recording if you're a little way away or if you're not quite directly facing into the microphone, I think is a property that I've heard of them. So
so for this kind of application where I'm sitting in a studio room with my voice bouncing, well, not bouncing too much anymore around the walls, a dynamic microphone is actually a very good choice.
Right.
Well, actually, in this environment that I have now, a condenser microphone would probably be a better choice because the room is very quiet now. But
we should swap because I've got a condenser microphone and a very echoey room, but you somehow seem to manage with my recordings.
Yeah, so I have taken delivery of these acoustic panels, and wow, it was like working in a bathroom before, and now it's like I'm working in a very finely tuned movie cinema. Like, it's really, really hard to believe that these are the same speakers. They just sound so much better.
Oh, good.
It's like, very deep lows and punchy bottom end, and a very detailed crisp mid-range and a smooth high end, and it just sounds absolutely fantastic. So yeah, basically the issue is with small rooms like this is bass control, because bass wavelengths are very, very big and bass frequencies tend to build up in corners. I have no idea why that would be, but it's the way it is, and you can actually try this out for yourself. If you put on a bass heavy track on your sound system and go and put your head in the corner of your room, you will probably find that it sounds much more bassy in the corners that compared to in the middle where you're likely to be listening from.
Interesting.
So in a sense, the corners of the room were kind of sucking away the bass from the speakers. And to compound that, a lot of the high end and the mid-range is bouncing off the walls in various places, meaning that the sound that I'm actually hearing is the sound of the room and not the sound of the speakers.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so now, on the other hand, it's really, really apparent that I am listening to the speakers, like the stereo field in front of you. And I think we've all had the experience of sitting in front of an accurately set up pair of stereo speakers where if you close your eyes, it really, really sounds like a 3D, well, actually two-dimensional plane in front of you.
Right.
In this case, it sounds remarkably good. You really close your eyes and you're standing in front of the sound. It's quite amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as an added bonus for doing this kind of recording work, my voice doesn't bounce off walls so much anymore, so hopefully the result here is good too.
Very good. Yeah, well, I look forward to hearing the actual recording when we finish recording it and you send me the master over to mix. Because yeah, like we said, I can't hear it yet, so it'll be a surprise to me as well as to all the listeners.
Speaking of listeners,
Yeah. You like your segues, don't you?
yes, I do, and I'm good at them. You must admit
it. Speaking of listeners, we've got some follow up. I've got quite a lot of bitty things. I've both follow up and topics. I've got a few sort of small things which I think I'm just going to bring up, and if they go somewhere, we'll run with it, and if they don't, we'll cut it.
Okay, sounds good.
So we did get some nice follow up from last week. We got a couple more international mentions on the Reddit. Our Icelandic listener popped on again and noted that the day we released our podcast episode a couple of weeks ago, there were celebrations on the streets of Iceland.
I mean, I would expect no less, really.
It's good to hear that they are sort of taking seriously their position second only to Sweden in podcast listenership. So that's great. There was also a football game going on that night, apparently. I'm not sure why they mentioned that, but...
No, I think it's just coincidental.
Yes, anyway, total coincidence. But good to hear there's celebrations in Iceland. Good to hear they're actually doing very well. This last couple of weeks, Iceland has raced ahead of Sweden.
Really?
So Iceland is actually doing better than Sweden now.
Well,
I won't go into all the statistics, but yes, Iceland on your game. Well done. We also got somebody from France who popped on the Reddit and just wanted to represent France and say they were listening. So it was great to hear from them.
Yes.
By the way, did you see the thing I tweeted about a few days ago about English biscuits in France? Did you see that?
I didn't actually. I've been a little under the pump with work recently, so no, I didn't. What was that about?
This is not a big topic or anything, but a friend of mine tweeted this and I thought it was brilliant. The tagline for McVitie's biscuit. Are you familiar with McVitie's biscuits?
Yes.
A very famous brand of biscuits in England. Biscuits, for our American listeners, are what you would call cookies. And there's a very famous brand of biscuits in the UK called McVitie's. And the tagline for this brand in France is, "They're English, but they're good."
Right.
It's written on the packet, and they've even got an advert which they ran in France. It looked like quite an old advert. I'm not sure if it's from the 90s or the early 2000s or what, but the entire advert is in English, which you can imagine you couldn't do. Imagine doing an entire advert for a French product in England or America where the whole advert is in French and you can just kind of assume that everyone will understand.
Right.
But they had that. So this entire advert is in English and it's pointing out all the sort of paradoxes about England. Like, it's an island, but you get there by train. And England invented football, but their national team's captain is Italian.
Right.
And England has really bad weather all the time, but its girls go out wearing hardly anything.
Right.
And things like that. Lots of little sort of cliched contradictions in English society. And then at the very end, it just ends with, "And we can't cook, but we make very good biscuits."
See, now this, I need to, before we continue with the follow-up, I think we need to come to the defense of English cuisine here for a moment, because...
Clear England's name.
I mean, let's face it, in the 80s and possibly the 90s, England definitely did not have, from my memory, did not have the best reputation for its cuisine. And I quote the 80s and the 90s simply because that was the age when I kind of took interest in this kind of thing.
Right. I mean, it still doesn't have a good reputation now. If you're talking about its reputation,
that's
the fact that this tagline exists is sort of testament to that.
I think that's the bit that I'm wanting to challenge here, because every opportunity that I've had to eat out at a restaurant in the United Kingdom has been very, very delicious.
Yes.
And I cannot say the same about America.
No.
I'm going to say it. I cannot say the same about America. You know, there's a whole range. There's a whole diverse selection of high quality and not so high quality eating establishments in the United States. But if you're looking at a sort of an average of food quality, ingredients, cooking preparation, and just general enjoyment of the experience of going to a restaurant,
right,
on average, I'm going to say that the United Kingdom comes before the United States. I think that it's a little unfair now to criticize England for its food. I mean, let's go through. We've got the standard fish and chips and that kind of stuff.
Yep, your English junk food is pretty good, pretty tasty as far as junk food goes.
Exactly, on the low end, starting on the low end of the scale. I mean,
right.
There's a lot of fish and chip shops that, in order to stay relevant today, they really put a lot of pride and a lot of effort into making, extremely good fish and chips.
Right.
And moving up the scale to, more expensive establishments or, business lunch eateries and places like that. I just couldn't, I was just never really disappointed on each occasion that I've eaten in the UK. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I take every opportunity to try and stand up for English cooking. I am obviously in a biased position because I'm English. But I think there's a lot of good food in England. And gastropubs is another thing that these days most pubs you go to have to have, a pretty good set of meal choices in order to compete. And so it used to be that a pub meal was like some grubby scampi and some soggy chips, but those days are over, I think, and it's kind of, it's got a lot better.
Do you think it might have something to do with the fact that there are, well, no, not, I was going to say, that there are a few sort of quintessentially internationally famous British dishes, but that's not really true either, is it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. There are quite a few. None of them are particularly fancy. Like, I think we are most famous for our kind of good, solid food, like pies. We make very good pies. Fish and chips, you also said. English breakfast, I think, is fairly internationally well known.
Right.
Not for everyone. Some people think the idea of eating that much sort of grease and fat first thing in the morning is disgusting, but it's well known, and I disagree with them. What else? Bangers and mash.
Yep.
It's a very simple, filling food, all of which are improved. I think everything I said, with the possible exception of breakfast, is elevated by the quality of the gravy that it is served with. So, yeah, I think that there are well-known dishes. And I think there's a few ways you can talk about food and the quality of food in a country, because we compare a lot. Obviously, we've moved to a new country relatively recently, moving to the Bay Area in California a year ago. And we've come from Japan, where the food is also extremely good.
Yep.
And so we've, it's been a point of comparison. And I think there's a few different axes on which you can compare, because you can say for affordable stuff, for like your everyday going out for a quick meal kind of stuff, if you're going to pay between $10 and $20, what sort of quality are you likely to get? And on average, what sort of quality bar can you expect? Then there's another category of, if you go all out and you pay a lot of money, what sort of quality of food is that? And that can be quite a different thing, right? You can have a place where the general average level of food, if you're not willing to pay that much money, is fairly low. But if you really fork out, you can get something really special. I think Japan has always done very good on both of those scales, because Japan has extremely good, very affordable food. We would eat out most lunchtimes, and we would rarely spend more than about, if we spent more than $10, we were kind of pushing the boat out.
Yeah.
And we would eat really well.
Yeah.
And really good quality food. So Japan does exceptionally well. France and Italy both pride themselves on the quality of their food. And I think that's you were comparing the UK against America, but the comparison that is being made in that McVitie's advert is between France and England. And France has always kind of looked down on England in terms of food a little bit, because France is extremely proud of its food and England has had this bad reputation.
I guess we can conclude, though, that the sort of famous dishes, the amount of famous dishes doesn't necessarily indicate the general international reputation of a country's cuisine, because if you look at Sweden and Australia, Sweden has really I guess two, all of two famous dishes. I guess if you were to ask somebody, what is Swedish food? Could you give them an example of Swedish food?
Right.
I guess you would probably get meatballs and mashed potato, and maybe like a cinnamon bun, perhaps.
Oh, is that Swedish?
Okay, well, I guess there's only one. It's basically meatballs and mashed potato then, isn't it?
Well, there's a funny thing, like we call, not a cinnamon bun, but we've got a thing in the UK which we call a Danish pastry.
Right.
But once when I was in Oxford and I was in a cake shop, somebody ran in, very flustered, and said, "I'm from Denmark, and we don't call them Danish pastries, we call them Belgian pastries." Then left.
It
was a very, very odd moment.
I wonder if that person just sort of runs around to all the bakeries that they can find and just
I've got something to clear up
barge in the
about
door.
My country's pastries.
Yeah, maybe there might be more efficient ways to do that instead of doing a door to door from every bakery and running in there and stating your case.
This is before the days of Twitter, so you've got to do something.
Right. But I mean, Australia is another case where, when you ask somebody from a different country, not Australia, give me an example of an Australian cuisine. I think within Australia, obviously you've got Vegemite, but that's hardly really cuisine. That's more like
that's just a thing.
It's more like a kind of construction material, really. It's actually yeast extract.
Yes,
and many people are curious what Vegemite tastes like. It's actually quite nice. It's a very dark flavor, extremely salty. So you don't want to have too much of it unless you're trying to trick a tourist into trying Vegemite for the first time, like the Japanese do with their wasabi.
Right.
You don't really want to have too much of it, but just a sort of a thin layer on top of some toast with some butter or something is actually quite nice.
Have you ever had Marmite?
Marmite that's like the poor man's version of Vegemite, isn't it?
No, it's the rich man's version of Vegemite. Vegemite is the poor man's version of Marmite.
I see. That's the way it is it?
Yeah, Vegemite. That was a very good description, but for English people, it's easier to sum up as just crap Marmite.
I see. Shots fired, Danny. Shots fired.
So the biggest difference between Vegemite and Marmite is that have you never seen Marmite, you don't know what it looks like or anything.
Does it look like sort of pain, death, and suffering? And
they're very similar. Vegemite and Marmite look taste and look very similar. They're almost the same thing, right? They're both a yeast extract.
Right.
But Vegemite is more like, I guess, a bit more like butter. Like you scrape it onto your knife and then you can scrape it onto the toast.
It's like a paste.
Like that. It's like a paste, right? Marmite is gloopy.
Ah.
So if you were to, it's more like the consistency of honey.
I see.
So if you were to put some on your knife and lift the knife up above the jar, it would sort of dribble slowly down back into the jar.
Right.
So it's a very different consistency to Vegemite, but the actual flavor is very similar.
Right.
And all the same things apply there. You don't want to put too much of it on toast. I love Marmite and Bovril as well growing up. Are you familiar with Bovril?
No, I know what it. I have heard the title, but I actually don't know what it is. I actually do not.
Bovril is really weird.
Isn't it a meat drink?
Yeah, the bov in Bovril is short for bovine. It's a cow-based drink. It's really odd, but it's got like exactly the same consistency and color of Marmite, and it's in the same style of jar. So it looks just like Marmite,
right?
But it's made of beef instead of yeast.
Amazing.
And you're supposed to use it to make a drink, right? So you pull out like a teaspoon of it and mix it with boiling water.
Right.
And you get this like drink that just tastes like gravy, basically. It's basically just like drinking gravy.
I see.
But I used to have it spread on toast like Marmite.
I see.
I don't know if you're supposed to do that. I think that's maybe an odd thing to do. I don't know if that's actually that common. But I used to just think it was more or less the same thing as Marmite, which I haven't had it in so long now that I couldn't tell you whether it tastes at all similar or not. But they're both black and gloopy, and I had them both on toast. And when I went to hospital in Spain when I was very young, I really liked Bovril, and I had to stay in the hospital overnight. And you're not supposed to eat because I'd had like anesthetic. So I wasn't supposed to eat for like 24 hours afterwards or something. But I woke up in the middle of the night really hungry, and the nurse was like really kind and everything. And so she was like, all right, well, I guess if it's something small, I can get you something. What do you want? And I was like, I want Bovril on toast. And this nurse didn't really know about Bovril, I guess.
Right.
So she just spread it on the toast, like really thick,
Right.
in the middle of the night when I'm not supposed to be eating because I've had anesthetic. And I was so sick.
But it was a good sick, wasn't it? It was a happy sick.
It was, well, it's stuck in my mind.
Yeah. Speaking of drinks, here in, I should probably just finish what I was saying before that, Australia, other than Vegemite, I guess you've got, Australian mince pies. When you actually go to Australia, the most delicious things are all food from basically the immigrant population. Well, Australia is all immigrant population, other than the.
Well, let's face it. I mean, that's similar here as well, right? In certainly in California and around the Bay Area,
right. So consequently, depending on the city, in Adelaide, Greek food and Vietnamese food and Cantonese food and Italian food.
Yeah,
these four are just top class. I mean, absolutely delicious, cooked by experienced people with extremely fresh ingredients. Just amazing. So, that you wouldn't really count that as Australian cuisine, although you do have, restaurants who have set up, they call it fusion food, where they take these foreign influences and, mix them up a little bit, but
make them with kangaroo.
I mean, I guess, actually kangaroo, my family, we have kangaroo regularly, once a week or so. Sounds a bit funny. People from other countries kind of raise an eyebrow when you say that you eat kangaroo for dinner, but it's actually quite nice.
Yeah, I've had a kangaroo burger or two in my time. It was all right.
So I wanted to just say that here in Sweden, there are some pretty amazing foods that you can get that I'd never actually had before. I know that they're not limited to Sweden, but they're very, very easily available here.
Right.
One of those is oat milk. Mm-hmm. Have you ever tried oat milk?
Is that what Ovaltine is?
I don't know exactly what Ovaltine is, so I can't. I know
It's another hot drink in the UK.
Yeah.
It's a brand name. But
Oat milk is basically, well, it's just as it sounds. It's milk made from oats, and it's very, very delicious. It tastes. It's basically like a creamy kind of liquid, a little bit sweet because it's got a little bit of sugar in it, I think, with a nice sort of hint of oat flavor in it. And it's very, very tasty. And it's very easily available here. You can also get almond milk.
Oh, yeah.
Which is great.
My wife has that every morning.
Oh, really? The honey in Sweden is amazing. There are various types of honey that you can get here, but the one that really surprised me that I'd never had before is a kind of honey, I think they call it garden honey, and it's not so much like a liquid, it's more like a paste. So when you take some out on your knife, it actually doesn't run at all.
Right.
Swedish people tend to only use that in their tea.
Oh, okay.
They don't actually, I like to spread it onto bread, but most Swedish people kind of think, well, really? Spread onto bread? You're supposed to take a spoonful and put it in your hot tea and leave it there.
Right.
But it's just, and of course cheese and all the Northern European things that you would expect cheese, and of course the bread, the quality and the range of breads is on a different level, really.
Incidentally, I just looked up Ovaltine, and Ovaltine is a brand of milk flavoring product made with malt extract. So it's not oat milk, it's malt. Similar category, but slightly different.
I think in Australia that's called malted milk.
Right.
Which makes sense, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. That does make sense, yes. There's a biscuit called that as well.
Malted milk.
And we're all the way back to biscuits.
All the way back to biscuits.
Perfect. I think we should get on with some more follow-up. This is
okay. Yes.
Last episode, we talked about Facebook's business model.
Yeah.
And we got quite a bit of feedback from that. It was quite interesting. I thought that whole discussion was really interesting. I'm still super intrigued to see if somebody can find a good way to explain it. But I had a couple more people who chimed in. Friend of the show, Ben, said that he thinks that Facebook actually operates more like a bank, which was an interesting sort of view. I wasn't quite sure what he meant, but when he explained it, I can sort of see where he's coming from. So the simple explanation you have of a bank, like when, banks are more complicated these days, but the simple explanation I remember being given when I was like 10 or whatever, is that the way a bank works is that you put your money in there. they kind of keep it safe in theory, but they don't just leave it there. They actually use that money to do things with it, right? To buy stocks and things like that. They invest that money.
Right.
And through their investments, that money grows. And then you see some of that growth return to you in the form of interest. And that is how interest in banks works. And then the difference between the interest you get and the rest of the money is what the bank makes.
Right.
Off having your money in the bank, right? And that was kind of the idea that Ben was coming from, where you put your data into Facebook in a way, and then they use that data in a variety of ways,
right,
by selling it directly to people or by using it to train neural networks and things like that. And they kind of invest that data in a way that increases its value. And then instead of giving you interest, which wouldn't make sense, like they just give you more information about yourself or something.
Right.
So you don't get interest, but what you get is the use of the service, right?
That's really fascinating, because a fundamental, I wouldn't say it's definitely not a flaw, but a fundamental difference with that idea is that data and currency are different. You know, you don't inherently have currency. It comes from somewhere.
Right.
You inherit it, or you work for it, or, you know, for many of the sources that we get currency,
right,
it's an exchange of something, and you've exchanged something else to get that currency, and then you take that currency and then again you exchange it for something else. And that's the way that, you know, currency works in the modern world.
Right.
Whereas data, arguably, you could say it's less like something that you have exchanged to get. It's more like inherent personal details about yourself. I guess if you could count, you know, your interests and the things you click on and the things that pique your interest and you know, set up flags of curiosity in your mind.
Right.
Those things are data, and you didn't exchange anything to get them. You create them as you're going through the service. So, not meaning to, you know, reopen the same conversation that we had last week, but yeah, that's Ben's idea is very fascinating.
Yeah, it's just another view. I mean, I'm not sure there is a correct notion here. They're just all interesting ways to model this idea, and I think it's very interesting. I think it's nice to explore other ways to look at this Facebook, and I'm using Facebook as a shortcut for all of these sorts of online services that gather your data and make their money from selling it or some derivative of it to advertisers. But it's interesting to see all these different models and to compare them. Ben's main problem with Temmer's notion of how Facebook works is what we talked about last time, which is that he doesn't think you can consider it barter when the users engaging in this barter are themselves not really aware of it and don't consider it to be barter themselves.
Did you, on our Reddit, which, by the way, on Reddit, our subreddit is Station 13, in case you were wondering.
/Station 13, yep, link in the show notes.
Did you see the really long and extremely fascinating post from Chuck YC17?
Chuck YC, I think it might be Chucky C17.
Chuck YC17, Chucky. My apologies, Chucky.
That's actually, so I mentioned a podcast last episode, which I called A-Town FM. The actual name of that podcast is A-Town, so a little correction there. And Chucky C17 is Charlie, who is one of the co-hosts of that podcast. So it was nice of him to drop by. And yes, I did see his post. That was very interesting, because he was talking about what you were talking about last episode, which I actually thought was not a fair... Last episode, when you were talking about comparing a brick and mortar shop to an online store like Facebook, or not store, but an online service like Facebook, and saying, well, if a brick and mortar shop had the same sort of notion of you've got to sign an agreement to go in and all of that, would it be as popular?
This is such a fascinating post. Do you think I should just read it? Because it really is very interesting. What do you think?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
So he writes, it's funny you use the example of a physical store having a terms of service book at the entrance, because many stores actually do a similar thing to Facebook and Google. When you're in a retail business's building, there are all sorts of ways they're collecting data on you. It used to be guys in the rafters manually watching people and tracking customer movement through the store, but it's increasingly more sophisticated. I worked with a company once that helped companies build systems that would use Wi-Fi to track customer phones as they moved around the store. If your phone's Wi-Fi is on, it scans for available Wi-Fi periodically. Routers throughout the store pick up the signal strength, and if there are 3 in the range, you can triangulate an exact position within the store. This essentially lets them create real-time heat maps of customers moving through their store, and if you download their loyalty app, they can attach more metadata to that location data. I feel like that muddies up the idea that you're the product for a free service, because even in a traditional transactional environment, you might still be the product in that sense. That's, wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, no, I was aware that this sort of thing sometimes happens, and I'm very suspicious of loyalty card apps but I still had a notion of the thing that I was suspicious of about loyalty card apps is that they are tracking my purchases, right? That I'm essentially giving them a sort of purchase history, which they can tag to a single person. But I hadn't stopped to consider that, oh yeah, actually, if you're going to have Wi-Fi all around a largish shop, then you could easily use these routers to triangulate the position of every customer carrying a phone, which is, let's face it, every customer these days.
Right.
And really do some quite detailed tracking on exactly how your shop layout works. And like he says, make a heat map, which, I mean, there's two places you can start. As someone who likes data and has worked with systems, that sounds great. If I was laying out the shop, I'd love to have a heat map to see how well a particular layout has worked, right? I've done that in level design where we've made a game and we've tracked everywhere that people die and how fast people are going at different points in the level and things like that. You can generate heat maps and you can see if you get this just big red splodge, a hell of a lot of people are dying at this point in the level, and if that's not what you intended, then that's something you need to fix.
Right.
So it's a very good technique. But as a person who walks into shops sometimes, it's a little bit scary.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Wi-Fi in general and also mobile connectivity. For the longest time, actually, you might remember, when we used to catch the train together to Station 13, hence the name of this podcast.
Yes.
I did not actually have a smartphone. Do you remember?
I do remember. You only had an iPod, which was, you were reliant on Wi-Fi every time you wanted to do anything on the interwebs.
That's right. And so using my iPod outside, i.e. outside of my own home or outside of the office, was something that I never really did, simply because I didn't have a smartphone.
Right.
And I used, the Apple iPod, which is basically exactly the same as the iPhone, except without the phone features.
Right. The iPod Touch.
Sorry. Yes, that's right. The iPod Touch. So coming to Sweden was actually the first time that I got a proper iPhone.
Right.
And obviously, the convenience is amazing. It's great. It's all in the pocket. It's all in your hand, so to speak. It's all right there. And there are so many times when I find it incredibly convenient and useful. And, like many things, certain types of technology, you wonder how you got by without it.
Yeah.
But the issue of location data and the issue of Wi-Fi and mobile network security is something that sometimes I wonder about, especially now that in today's lifestyle, we all come to rely on our mobile devices so much. And it's sort of a given that in a lot of first world countries, everybody has one, or at least every adult does. You kind of imagine that it seems like we're walking on thin ice, I guess, as far as we rely on these devices so much. And obviously, there are the companies who provide us with these devices, and their operating systems have extremely, they have the top class, world class engineers working on the security functions of these things every day. So I don't worry about it too much, but just the amount of reliance that we have on these devices, the things that they can do, and the kind of information about us that they transmit, it's food for thought, really, isn't it?
Or that they hold. I mean, they are the most personal device and personally revealing device that mankind has ever produced, really. They hold logs of everything you've done. They hold your communications with all your closest associates. They hold your photos, all of your photos. They hold tracking of everywhere you've been. There's, you can see the sort of route you've taken.
Right.
So they do hold a lot of data about you. To be fair, this Wi-Fi issue that Charlie mentions would have affected you with your iPod Touch because that had Wi-Fi. So that is not an iPhone-specific issue. That was already the case for you when you were carrying an iPod Touch around.
Yeah, that's true. Did you read about that Wi-Fi security exploit?
Yeah, the crack exploit, the WPA2 thing. Yeah, have you read much about it?
No, I don't. I kind of glanced over it, but I didn't really understand it. So you're going to have to explain it to me.
It is at the same time the sort of biggest, scariest security breach in a long time, and also not something that I think the average person needs to worry about too much.
Right.
I think I have yet to read any mainstream reporting on it, so I don't know, because these things often get sort of misunderstood and blown out of proportion by newspapers and mainstream non-technology related outlets.
Right.
So I'm kind of expecting some bad reporting to happen. Like the Guardian's reporting on WhatsApp last year was just atrocious. But anyway, I won't go into that in any more detail, but I might put a couple of links to some bad articles in the show notes if anybody wants to make themselves angry. With this one, I'm still working out. We've talked about security a few times, and I feel like I have to reiterate every time that I am by no means an expert in security. I'm very much a layman, and I'm just talking about my own understanding. I may be making mistakes, but this is what I understand about the problem. WPA2 is a way that devices connect to Wi-Fi and establish an initial connection with Wi-Fi.
Right.
With the router in your house or your company or whatever. We used to use a thing called WEP, W-E-P.
Right.
And that was proven to be cryptographically insecure, so everyone moved over to WPA and then WPA2. A problem has been found in the WPA2 protocol itself. Not any particular implementation, but the actual specification of the way it should be implemented. And this allows you to repeat packets. Repeat packets means if a device has sent a packet over the network before, you can make it send that same thing again. And by making it repeat packets, I think you can that gives you more shots at decrypting things, something. My initial understanding was that you could establish yourself in a man-in-the-middle position between the device, like your iPhone or your computer or whatever,
right,
and the router, and sort of modify packets that are being sent to your device. I'm not 100% sure that understanding is correct, so I may be making a mistake here. But the danger of being able to do that, of course, is that you can send malware, you can inject things into the stream. So somebody can think they're going to a completely safe website, but unsafe things are being slotted in between.
Right.
And if you can do that, another thing you can do is things like keylogging and getting passwords from people, right?
Right.
So that sounds pretty bad. And because it's a problem with the actual protocol and not an implementation, it means that every conformant device has this problem. So it's not like this particular device had a bug. In fact, by definition, if a device does not have this problem, then it is buggy because it's not conforming to the protocol correctly.
I see.
Maybe I'm using the present tense, but I should say had, because they've pretty much all fixed it now. Which leads me on to the reasons that I don't think people should be too worried necessarily. Firstly, this is a problem in Wi-Fi, which means you need to be physically close to the device that you want to, or to the Wi-Fi network that you want to get into, right?
Right.
So this isn't the sort of thing that some random hacker on the internet can get into your home network. Somebody would actually have to drive around to be near to your house and hang around outside trying to get into your Wi-Fi network, right? Or if you're in a Starbucks using the shared network, that's the more sort of tenable target, I guess. So there's that mitigating factor. Another thing is that fixes have already been put out for a lot of the things that you might be using. So I know that all of the Apple devices, I think, have had a fix. I'm sure the Windows stuff will have as well. I'm not sure about the state of Android. Android is always complicated because I expect Google has put a fix out, but it can often take a long time to get from Google's fix through to, Samsung or whoever owns the phone, and then to an actual update that you install on your phone.
I see.
But this is such a sort of famous big deal that I would hope at least that all the actual phone manufacturers are going to be pretty quick about putting up fixes, but we'll see. I don't really know. You do have to patch or fix. You have to install the updates on all the clients. This is not a thing that if you fix the router, then your whole network is safe. And that's another area where it's a bit scary because these days there's a lot of people who've got sort of Internet of Things devices.
Right.
Where, their light bulbs or their cameras, like security cameras in their house, or sometimes even the locks on their doors, are controlled through a smart device, right?
Right.
And these sort of small, purpose-built devices that are connected to the Wi-Fi and connected to the internet are typically not updated as frequently and don't have the same sort of security guarantees that your phone does.
I see.
So people with a lot of those devices will want to sort of do a bit of an audit of their own devices and make sure they're fully up to date, check whether the manufacturer of their devices put out an update to deal with this problem. So if you've got a lot of those devices, I think you may want to take a little bit more care because any device that is connected to your Wi-Fi is a potential attack vector, right? So, but if you don't have many of those devices, you've just got a computer and a phone and your router, then if you just make sure you've updated to the latest, whenever you get, I don't know if they've been pushed out yet or not, but whenever a patch or an update gets pushed out, just install it and you should be fine. So I think a lot of people are getting very worried. Another thing you can do is to plug in via Ethernet instead of Wi-Fi. So if you've got a computer that you're using at home and you want to play it safe, then plugging that computer into Ethernet is probably not a bad idea, right? Using a wired connection because that saves you from that potential problem. But if that's not a convenient thing for you to do, then I'm not sure that all-out panic is necessarily required. Oh, one more tip that I've seen bandied around on the internet that I think is worthwhile is if you have a shared file system, like we've got a drive that's available on the Wi-Fi that we use for backups and things like that, make sure that's got a password on it so that even if somebody gets into your Wi-Fi, they can't actually get into your files without knowing the password.
I see.
So those are some little pieces of advice that I've seen. It is a big deal, I think, for people working in the tech industry and for people with an interest in security. It is big news, and it's not like we can all be totally blasé about it. But I don't think the sky is falling in, and I think we can, so long as we just make sure we've updated all our things, I think we can keep calm
and carry on.
And indeed, carry on. So that's all I have to say about the crack thing, I suppose.
I know you gave a disclaimer about not being an expert in information technology security, but this is a question which has always bothered me and perhaps other listeners too, which you probably are qualified to answer because you definitely have much more knowledge about this than most people, I'm sure. But the safety of public Wi-Fi, such as, you mentioned using your phone on Wi-Fi in Starbucks or, a public library Wi-Fi network or airport Wi-Fi or things like that.
Right.
Specifically, this is very relevant for people who travel a lot because obviously when you go overseas and you are not wanting to pay expensive roaming charges from your network provider, you often find yourself relying pretty heavily on public Wi-Fi or shop Wi-Fi or things like that. So, I mean, in simple terms, how safe is that? If you find yourself needing to rely on those services, is that something that you can just use freely? You just attach your phone to the Wi-Fi network and just go for it? Or what's your feeling there?
As with most things it depends. It depends on who you are and what your threat model is. Threat model is a term that is used a lot in security, but when you're thinking about security, it's not a binary thing. It's not like I am secure or I am not secure. A lot of factors weigh in, and the kinds of approaches that you take are going to be different from the sorts of things that Edward Snowden has to do, right? Because he's a very well-known public figure now who there are a number of people who would be very keen to intercept his communications.
Right.
So he's obviously got a big target painted over him in a way that you or I don't.
Right.
So there is that. Everyone has to decide their own what sorts of threats they are going to account for and what they're going to live with. But in the case of public Wi-Fi, as far as I understand it, there are a couple of potential attacks that you need to be wary of. Firstly, I'm pretty sure I'm correct in saying that aside from this WPA2 crack exploit, assuming that everything is updated, the communication between you and the router is encrypted.
I see.
So somebody just sitting in the same cafe as you, who doesn't have control of the router in that cafe, say, can't just sniff all the data that you're sending over the internet, which I think, once upon a time they could. And depending on the way the network is configured, if it uses WPA2 encryption or something similar. So if it is a secure local connection, then you don't need to worry too much about other people sitting in the same cafe and just sniffing over everything you do.
Right.
But, of course, you don't have any control over the router itself.
I see.
And there's like a line between you and the local router, and then there's a line between the router and the rest of the internet, right?
Right.
And the person who has control of the router, the owner of the cafe, or if you want to get into sort of weird spy territory, anybody who's walked in and sort of quickly slipped in a USB chip into the router that takes it over or whatever. Anybody who has control over the router can read everything you're doing, right?
Right.
That is your gateway to the rest of the internet, so they can intercept that if they've got control of the router. So that's one thing to consider. So if you think you might not trust the owner of the cafe, or if you think that somebody might be following you and you want to be very careful, then, well, that is one potential point of attack. If you are going on a website that is served with HTTPS, then even if somebody has control of the router, your traffic is encrypted all the way over to the site. So they still won't be able to read any data going over HTTPS, even if they have control of the router.
That's in the case of using a web browser, but what about, if most people are using dedicated apps to do things like look at Facebook or look at Twitter or look at the Station 13 subreddit, as most people do or should do.
Exactly. Well, so that depends on the app, and you have no real way of knowing except for asking Facebook or Twitter or Reddit, or maybe they've published some security documentation. I don't know, but
I see.
Reddit's website is served over HTTPS. In fact, all three of those websites are served over HTTPS. So if you're browsing those sites in the browser, then you're fine.
I see.
If you're using the app, that will be using some sort of API, very likely an HTTP-based API these days.
Right.
And it's up to the developer of the app whether they're doing that over an HTTPS connection. I would be extremely surprised if major services like Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit are not using HTTPS for all their communication. I would be shocked, in fact,
I see.
if that's the case. So I expect that all of that data is pretty safe. I just sort of listed 2 points of attack, but there are other places as well. The DNS, for example, when you go to a website, you're using a name for that website, right? Like facebook.com.
Right.
But that's not, the website actually has a location. It is stored on a server somewhere physically.
Right.
And that location is identified by an IP address. And DNS is the name of the service that maps the domain name, like facebook.com or station13.fm, to a particular IP address.
Right.
If something can get in and muck about with the DNS, and again, if somebody's got access to the router, they can do this. If they can tell your computer or your phone or whatever that that Facebook.com is not over here. Actually, it's over here, where over here is their own server that does naughty things and then maybe forwards all the traffic to Facebook to get you the actual answer you wanted. If they can do that, then that's another attack, right? And DNS is fairly easy. DNS is not a very secure system.
Right.
So if you've managed to insert yourself anywhere in the pipeline between, the device, your phone, and the world, then you can do tricky things with that. And there are attempts to deal with this. HTTPS websites have to serve a certificate which proves their authenticity. And if your computer has been to that website before, then it can look at the certificate when it goes to connect and say, well, hang on, this certificate has changed since last time I connected. So there might be something funny going on. And that's when you see, if you're looking in the browser, you'll get a message coming up saying, warning, this might be insecure, the certificate's different, whatever.
I see.
With an app, again, no guarantees. It all depends on how the developer of the app decides to handle that case. So it's difficult to know.
This conversation is taking me back to a scene in Terminator 2 when Edward Furlong, I can't remember the name of Edward Furlong's character. What was he called again?
I can't remember. The kid?
Yeah.
I can't remember either. But you're talking about the dog, right?
No, I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about the scene. I'm thinking of the scene where he goes up to the cash ATM, the bank ATM, and plugs in a card with a wire coming out of it, attached to a small little, like an Atari PDA,
right?
And then you watch on the screen like all these numbers kind of crunching down until it finds like a PIN number or something, and then he punches it in and gets some cash out, and looks at his friend and he says, "Easy money."
Right. Right. That's like the first scene he's in, right? That's your introduction
I think that's
to the
right.
character.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, one of my best friends in high school and still now, he actually went and got one of those Atari PDAs just because he thought it would be cool to have the same devices that he used in the movie to get cash out of an ATM.
Right.
Of course, getting
Doesn't
cash out of
work.
an ATM, it doesn't work like that, no. And it's a good thing too. But
Did you know Terminator 2 they're going to be replaying it at cinemas because it's like the anniversary or something. It's the 25-year anniversary. So I'm not sure in Sweden, but in America, they're going to be playing the original Terminator 2. Annoyingly, they've remixed it for 3D. So
oh, really?
you can watch it with 3D glasses, but forget about that. They're also doing it in some cinemas. They're doing it not in 3D. So you can go and see Terminator 2 at the cinema.
Oh, which
sounds great, and I really want to do. I can't remember when it's on. I think maybe I've already missed it. I saw the trailer for it ages ago, but it looks great. So I'd like to do that.
Yes. See, I don't know about that. I mean,
about going to see Terminator 2 at the cinema.
No, I don't know about that. I mean, there are some movies. Okay, we're talking science fiction here, and there are some science fiction movies that definitely benefit from the big screen, the big sound, the whole cinematic experience. For example, the obvious choice there is Star Wars.
Right.
The other obvious choice is 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Okay.
The other obvious choice is the original Blade Runner.
Yep.
Any of these movies are all about the ambience and that grand scale of space, or the Millennium Falcon flying through the asteroids, and or in Blade Runner where you've got the wonderful music of Vangelis playing with that hazy red, super future dystopia kind of vista of the city there, or the 2001 Space Odyssey. Obviously, the whole movie. Obviously, it's an absolute classic of science fiction,
right?
And the grandeur of that movie is definitely enhanced by a big screen and a big sound system.
Right.
Now, Terminator 2, to me, the appeal of Terminator 2 is on the same par as the appeal of Aliens, I guess.
Right.
They're both by the same director.
Big action movies. And
Right. They're kind of more gritty, more. They are action movies,
right?
Action science fiction movies. But to me, I would enjoy Terminator 2 on a small screen as much as I would on the big screen. So to hear that, they're going to be showing it at the cinema again, to me, it's sort of, well, I don't know. Personally, I don't know that I would enjoy it that much more on a big screen versus on the small screen.
I don't know. I'm keen to see it. It's I mean, Terminator 2's got a great soundtrack as well.
True,
and
true.
It's a classic. I don't know. All of the movies you listed, I have not seen on the big screen.
Oh, really?
I've only seen them on the small screen. I mean, I was too young for all of them.
But
Blade Runner, Star Wars, 2001, certainly.
But you've never... Well, that's interesting, because Star Wars, I was also too young, but when I was a teenager, I think, they had a special rerunning of the three classic movies in the cinema, so I went to see it. And yes, it's just as incredible as everybody says it is. You know, those opening scenes when the Star Destroyers, fly in over the camera.
Right.
And it's really, 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 really big on the big screen. Just as incredible as you would imagine it would be. But that's interesting. So you never had that opportunity.
So I've never seen any of them. I haven't seen Terminator 2 on the big screen either, so I'm not in a very good position to judge the relative merits of any of them. What I have seen, I've actually been to the cinema twice in the last 2 weeks, which is, I hardly ever get to go to the cinema these days. But yeah, since we last spoke, I've been twice. And one of the films that I went and saw was the new Blade Runner film.
Right. Now, hold on. Hold up here. Please, no spoilers.
No. So I don't want to spend very much time talking about the new Blade Runner film because, A, you haven't seen it yet, and B, neither has anybody else. Well, a lot of people haven't seen it yet. And so,
right.
And I spent the last week waiting to listen to A-Town because they did a Blade Runner podcast, and obviously I couldn't listen to it because I hadn't seen the movie yet.
Oh, okay.
It was very good. I'll say that much. Blade Runner was very good.
Okay. That's enough.
It's very good. You should see it. And you should see it at the big screen because it is definitely one of these films that benefits from the big screen.
Just one more question.
Yeah.
Is the music good?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good.
That is all.
Yeah. So it's very good music. The atmosphere is brilliant, and they've definitely sort of taken so much from the original film and sort of brought it alive again. So it's an amazing achievement, I think. Very, very good.
Okay.
Anyway.
The other movie.
That aside, the other movie that I saw is fairly safe in terms of spoilers because it's a biographical movie about Vincent van Gogh.
Oh, okay.
And it's not a major spoiler to say he cuts off his ear.
Right.
But the interesting thing about this movie, it's an animated movie.
Okay.
Where every frame is an oil painting.
Wow.
It created an entire 1.5 hour long animated movie. I think it was 65,000 frames.
Wow.
And every frame is an actual oil painting. Some of the frames...
Oh, hold on. It's actually oil painting.
Yes. They had a team of 100 artists who painted these frames.
How long did it take?
A long time, I imagine. It's a joint Polish-UK production, and it was originally funded through Kickstarter and then through, various other funding for the arts and things.
Right.
And not every frame is an individual oil painting. For some sequences, they painted the first frame and then they shot it. And then because oil, you can paint on top of itself, right? So you can,
right.
They modified the first frame by painting on it some more and then took another shot and then did that.
That's clever.
So you can see for some sequences, you can see for some, it's quite interesting. For some of them, the background is very static because they're not repainting that every frame.
Right.
And then they've got somebody walking along and you can see them walking and you can kind of see a little bit of smudging behind where they walked as they repaint the background back in from where they used to be.
Right.
But it's obviously an amazing artistic achievement. Just an amazing piece of work from the point of the medium, right? Of taking animation, but doing it not with... I don't know if they used cell techniques as well. Like, I don't know if some of these oil paintings were on transparent sheets that they placed on top of other oil paintings. I mean, things like that.
It's amazing because I've just done a quick calculation. If the movie was, for example, 120 minutes long, and it runs at 24 frames per second,
right?
That's on the order of 172,800 frames.
Right. Well, I think I've got the Wikipedia. I think it's 65,000 frames.
Okay, I see.
It's 65,000 frames. The film is 91 minutes.
Okay, right.
So it's 1.5 hours, so it's shorter than you said.
Right.
And I'm not sure what the frame rate is, but I don't think they necessarily need to do it at 24.
Right.
So whatever it is, It's 65,000 frames, and there was a team of 115 painters. So you could work out how many frames it is per painter. It's a few.
Amazing.
And the music is by Clint Mansell, who did the music for Requiem for a Dream and some other things. I just recognized his name from Requiem for a Dream, but I think he's done lots of big famous things. He did Ghost in the Shell as well. And it's got some fairly famous British names in it. It's got Jerome Flynn, who I always think of Robson and Jerome, the sort of weird 90s pop album that he did. But he's more famous these days for playing Bronn in Game of Thrones.
Right.
And it's got Helen McCrory, who is in a lot of things. She was in the Harry Potter films. She's in Peaky Blinders. So, yeah, she's in a lot of things. Had a couple of other people I recognize, but I can't remember. And just fascinating, sort of just a really interesting new thing to see.
Yeah.
In terms of the actual story and the acting, it follows this guy who's not anybody particularly famous, but somebody who I think grew up in the same town as Vincent or lived in a town where Vincent van Gogh lived.
Right.
And it takes place after he's committed suicide, right? After Van Gogh has committed suicide.
Okay.
And he's got this letter that he wanted delivered to his brother. And he wrote a huge number of letters in his life. So the postman from the town that he was living in kind of knew him personally because he just always went and picked up all these letters. And so the postman feels very sad that he's died and gives this letter to his son to deliver. And then his son goes off and goes down to Paris and tries to find this brother. Turns out the brother has also died. And so then he tries to find out more about Van Gogh's death, and he goes to the village that he was in when he killed himself.
Right.
And talks to various people in that village. And all the scenes are inspired by actual Van Gogh paintings. So they've kind of taken a painting and then constructed a character out of the subject of that painting and had those characters kind of played by actors. And they've clearly made their, it's all hand painted, but it must be painted based on a recording that they shot with the actual actors because they've got all the facial expressions and things that actor would make.
Right.
So the dialogue was, I'm not so sure about the writing. I don't think that's the main thing they were trying to do with it, I guess.
I see.
But sometimes it let the rest of the project down a little bit. And I think sometimes the acting for the more minor characters, they must have paid so much on the, famous names.
Right.
And on the 115 artists to paint everything. But some of the minor characters, I found their acting a little bit off sometimes. But as a sort of interesting thing to go and see.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And really interesting to see how animation works in this very different medium.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me of, this is kind of a segue, but it's actually also quite relevant.
Right.
I rarely watch movies that are not science fiction just because, well, no reason other than, that's really what I'm interested in. And
for the same reason you don't read any books that aren't the Silmarillion.
Well, there's slightly different there, the reason for that. But anyway, listeners can go back to Station 13 episode, whatever it was, to find out more about that. But anyway,
link in the show notes.
The favorite movie for myself of all time, I'm going to ask you this in a moment too, but top 3 movies, I would say the first one is the original Tron movie. Second for me would probably be 2001: A Space Odyssey, and third would probably be either Aliens or Star Wars: A New Hope. But anyway, Tron, the original movie, had a similar, very, very long-winded, very laborious process. I'm not sure if you're familiar with how it was actually made.
I think I may have come across sort of stories about it before, but I can't remember.
Yeah, so actually, Tron is a mixture of 3 types of footage. It's a mixture of regular live-action footage. It's a mixture of hand-painted, animated cell footage.
Right.
And it's a mixture of computer graphics footage.
Right.
For the first time, actually, like pure computer graphics footage.
Right.
Not only, the reason that I loved the original Tron movie so much is, on all counts, it's utterly brilliant. The storyline is, for its time, 1984, I believe, was incredibly forward-thinking as far as predicting, the modern world of computer networks and the way that would work. And also within those computer networks, you have the large evil, what would you call it? The mega corporation kind of presence, along with so the storyline is extremely innovative and extremely thought-provoking and very, very relevant even today. The production techniques, not only did it have the first examples of purely computer-generated graphics in the movie, but the scenes where they're actually inside on the grid, so to speak, inside the computer world, I guess you could call it in simplistic terms, are actually all done by hand-painted cell animations. So they took all of the frames of the actors doing their thing and actually hand-painted on all of the glow that you see.
Oh, right.
They didn't hand paint on the glow literally, but they actually made masks over every individual frame that would only show through the lines on their suits and the lines in the backgrounds and things like that, and then rear projected them so that the light is actually shining through the mask, and then take a picture of that, and that is your finished frame.
Right.
And they did that for every single frame.
Jeez.
Just amazing. So the production side of it, the computer graphics, and then the task of actually doing that, just the clarity of vision. This is what we're going for, and this is what we're going to achieve, even though the road to get to that is so long. On that regard, it's utterly brilliant as well. And then there's the music, written by Wendy Carlos. Wendy Carlos, for those who don't know, is one of these famous synthesizer artists from the 70s who made her name for a lot of synthesized classical music. And in the case of Tron, it was sort of synthesized orchestral music, together with some really choice early 80s pop rock as well, one of the more notable tunes being from Journey. On every count, Tron is just, and just to watch it, whether you're a child or an adult, it's just got something for everybody to enjoy. I absolutely love it. It just never gets old. So that's definitely my number one science fiction movie. So what about you?
For movies in general?
I know that you have a much more broader palette of interests for movies than I do, but just for the sake of this conversation, let's limit it to science fiction.
Oh, science fiction makes it a bit more difficult because I don't think I've got as deep an understanding of science fiction as you. I'm trying to think what science fiction movies I've ever seen. I obviously love Aliens, the whole Alien series, and 2001, which I only saw relatively recently. I only saw 2001, a few years ago.
Oh, really?
What else is there? Star Wars, obviously, which is great, and Blade Runner. What other science fiction movies are there?
I don't know.
It's hard to talk about a favorite when there's like, like Star Wars, Aliens, and Blade Runner. Oh, well done. I'm trying to think. I'm sure if I'd thought a bit more in advance, I'd have a better answer, but I'm not really sure. I can't think off the top of my head. What other science fiction?
Just as a slight detour on this point, what was your impression of 2001 and why did you think it was good?
I want to see 2001 again. 2001 is obviously amazing for a lot of reasons. As a piece of cinematography, as an example of the art as it stood at that time, it's amazing. It does things that have still sort of not been repeated with technology that is very basic compared to ours. As a cultural touchstone, it's also obviously very important. I mean, I only saw 2001 a couple of years ago, but I still knew the sort of key phrases of, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that, and things like that. Yeah, but it does go a bit weird at the end.
2001, it's another example, like Tron, where its production is just leaves you speechless. The skill in because there's no special effects in that. That's all real, so to speak.
Right.
Like, for example, this is kind of a production spoiler. So if you don't like to know how special effects are done, then switch off now. But there's a scene in 2001 where one of the characters is riding a shuttle to an orbiting station for a meeting at the start, and he falls asleep, and there's a pen floating through because there's no gravity inside.
Right.
The shuttle, there's a pen floating, and the stewardess comes through with these kinds of magnetic boots keeping her down to the floor.
Right.
And plucks the pen out of the air and gives it back to the man.
Right.
Have Do you know how that's done? Do you want to know how that's done?
Sure. Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's so simple. To look at, you just think, wow, the pen's just floating in mid-space because there's no gravity. That's cool.
Right.
It's so simple. It's basically a clear piece of Perspex,
Right.
and the pen is attached to it. And they basically have people off camera who are holding that piece of Perspex and slowly rotating it in front of the camera. And then the actress comes up and basically plucks it off the Perspex.
Right.
Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah.
It's so simple.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, just the one thing that I want to say about 2001 is that I think it was the first time I had seen a science fiction movie, and I watch a lot of science fiction movies. I used to. The first time I'd seen one where I realized to the extent to which science fiction movies have become action movies, because
Right.
it's not really an action movie.
Right. No. It's a movie about ideas.
Right, exactly. And, just the whole way it starts, where you've got that, the way it starts and the way it ends is incredible. You've got that,
Yeah.
some very, very sophisticated, very cerebral 20th century atonal music for several minutes at the start with a black screen.
Right.
Is fantastic. And I've never seen that done since. That there is action obviously in it, and that there's a lot of tension in it, but it's definitely not an action movie the way that science fiction movies since the 80s
Right.
have all become. Nowadays you don't really see science fiction movies that often that are not purely, if you just change the context from the future to something, the past or the present, there's basically just an interchangeable action movie
Right.
with a different context behind it.
Yeah. I think Interstellar was trying to be a bit more in that mold.
Yeah, possibly. Interstellar, I guess, and also The Martian is relatively...
Yeah.
it's not an action movie in the sense that, a lot of Ridley Scott's recent movies are.
Right.
But, yeah, I suppose The Martian and Interstellar would qualify sort of in that direction.
Yeah. The Martian is based on a book that has a real sort of sense of humor about it as well.
Right.
So I think that.
Not really on the extent to which 2001 is really an intellectual journey.
Right. I think The Martian and Interstellar are not action movies.
Right.
But they're not, for want of a better word, artsy in the same way that 2001 is.
Right. So,
Not quite so cerebral in their nature. Speaking of space and all that, actually, did you see the neutron star collision that they reported a couple of days ago?
I didn't. Tell me about that.
So again, we've gone from security, which I'm a rank amateur at, to astronomy, which I literally know almost nothing about. But
That's okay.
common theme on this podcast. We've talked about space a few times, despite not knowing anything about it. So 2 neutron stars have collided. They obviously collided many tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago,
That's cool.
but we've just seen it. And they are not sure yet whether the result of that collision is a sort of dead neutron star or whether it's a black hole. They think it's almost certainly a black hole,
Right.
which means this will be the first time we've seen a black hole being formed, I think, or at least formed from 2 neutron stars. And the other interesting thing about this is confirmed a couple of theories. We've known that this is sort of a likely thing that happens for a long time, but this is the first time we've been able to actually observe it. And one of the theories that it's confirmed is that when they collided, they shot out a huge amount of heavy metals, of gold and platinum and things like that.
And Opeth.
And they shot out a lot of gold and platinum. And the theory is that most, if not all, of the gold and platinum in the universe, and therefore on Earth, is the result of neutron star collisions. That's the only thing that we've observed that has enough energy to form these elements. And so it's just a fascinating thing to think that the ring on your finger, if you're wearing a wedding band, if you've got a gold or a platinum wedding band, that was shot out from 2 stars joining together. I mean, it sounds all sort of romantic, but that is literally where it came from.
Yeah.
And I just think that's fascinating.
I mean, that is fascinating. But to me, look, sorry, I've said it before and I'll say it again. 2 neutron stars colliding, that's really amazing. But the fact that we know about this event now that happened so long ago because the light that we get from the night sky, from the starry sky, is so ancient.
Yeah.
And the fact that we look up and we're looking at the past. Sorry, but to me, that I said it before, I know, but to me, that is
awesome in the true sense of the word, right? That is awe-inspiring.
Looking up at the sky at night and seeing the past. I mean, I could just wonder about that for ages and ages.
So I was talking about this a little while ago with my wife, as our typical after-dinner conversation is about the nature of space and the universe. And I was thinking, so do you know what the earliest supernova that we have record of is?
No.
It's called the SN 185 supernova.
That's a very, very romantic name, isn't it?
And, well, yes, they don't have very romantic names, supernovas. But, supernova is the birth of a star. It's a very big astronomical event. And the first one that we have recorded is SN 185, which was observed probably in around AD 185. That's where it gets the name from.
I see.
So nearly 2,000 years ago, it was definitely observed and written about by Chinese astronomers.
Right.
And it's thought that it was probably observed by the Romans as well. But we don't have actual written record of that. And I was thinking, so that's a much more sort of primitive society than ours, right? 2,000 years ago. It's obviously fairly advanced in that they can look at this and understand that it's even a thing worthy of note, right?
Right.
But when you compare it to where we are now and where we're using these amazing instruments to detect these neutron star collisions and things like that, and obviously ties in with my recent interest in the classics and in ancient Greek and all of that, but it's a much earlier society, and they've observed this thing, and now we are observing sort of things that have happened later as well. But the thing that got me thinking is that happened like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years ago. And over the course of the time that the light from that supernova happening, or from this collision happening, that light has progressed over however many tens or hundreds of thousands of light years. In fact, I can see SN 185 was 9,100 light years away, right? So over almost 10,000 years, that event has been replayed at positions everywhere between here and there. And I tend to fall on the side that there's almost certainly some other life in the universe, right? Because there's just so many planets, there's so many stars, there's just the probabilities just seem to make it inevitable to me, right?
Right.
So over the course of that 10,000 years, different civilizations at different periods in their history must be seeing this same event and wondering what it means and learning about their place in the universe from it. And that becomes part of their written record. And I just think that whole thing is really amazing. Like this neutron star collision that we've just seen, we're seeing it where we are now,
right,
in terms of our technology tree, if you like. And something in between here and there, they might be more or less advanced than us.
Right.
And they may have seen the same thing and will understand it in a different way. And we're all puzzling over the same thing. But we're puzzling over it at very different times because we are seeing the light at very different times.
Right.
And it forms a building block for civilization and for our understanding of the universe. We will use this in the future as the basis of some other bit of progress that we make.
Right.
And all the other sort of civilizations between here and there, and the civilizations that are going to see it from now on, now that the light has gone past us,
right,
and is still continuing on to the end of the universe, if such a thing exists.
Right.
The whole thing is just amazing and awe-inspiring. And I think I just love the idea of thinking about these different cultures at different periods in their history, seeing this thing and scratching their heads over it.
It's almost like a Star Trek Next Generation episode in the making here, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe.
or not. Or not.
I don't know. To me, the Star Trek thing where you can go beyond light speed, and so we could go from here to one of these other civilizations and compare how we see this thing to how they see it. That kind of breaks some of the magic of it for me, I think.
Okay, it's not Picard and his hot Earl Grey.
No.
Riker punching aliens, doing the James T. Kirk alien punch. No.
I've got no problem with Star Trek. I just don't find thinking of these specific real world things in terms of Star Trek to add anything to to their brilliance.
Right.
But anyway, I just thought that whole thing was amazing, and I think it's really interesting to see how the heavens and astronomy have been hugely important parts of our various civilizations. The Egyptians obviously assigned a huge amount of importance to them. And the Chinese made very detailed measurements of them and recorded all that. And now here we are sort of internationally collaborating to try and learn more about these things. And, when there are people who were looking out for these neutron star collisions that had computer systems that would look out for them and then send them like a text when it looked like one was about to happen.
Right.
And so they would know and they could rush in and just all point their telescopes in that direction. So people all around the world just pointing their telescopes at this thing to get a look at it.
Right.
And comparing results. And the whole thing is just amazing.